and welcome back to Global PayFest 26. We are now in Colombia, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ricardo Arambulo from Solutions Payroll. Hi, Ricardo. Nice to have
Nice
you.
to meet you, Natalie. Right, Grace and Natalie. I am really excited to be here. I am Director of Operation. Thank you for that in Solutions Payroll. Currently, we have a lot of experience to Latin America. We start to working in payroll in Colombia and later to moving on to other countries as Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, Panama, Dominican Republic. And right now I try to, to share with you and your audience all my experience through that exciting travel through the payroll across Latin America.
Amazing. I know for a lot of organizations, expanding into Latin America can be daunting, to say the least. So let's start by setting the scene, because whenever we've spoken, Ricardo, you've always kind of described payroll as a living system. What exactly does that mean in practice for organizations operating in Latin America?
When I say the payroll is a living system, I mean it's not only something static. It's something you configure once and just let. Now, that is not Latin American payroll. In Latin America, every is constantly changing. Regulation, tax rule, even, how the employees perceive the interpretation. So payroll is not about only calculation. Yes, it's about constantly interpreting what happened around it. For example, and something I learned over time, at the beginning, it was very focused in the process. Yes, that way I started working in Latin America. I very, very strict with the process, making sure it was technically correct. But when you realize that payroll is much done, you have to connect people. You have to understand regulation, to understand the culture. Everything is moved. Everything is moved. So when I say it's a living system, I mean this requiring a constant attention. You need to validate, adjust, and really to understand the local context. For organization, this means cannot be treated a fixed process. You need to strong governance to local communities. The most important, and the ability to adapt quickly. Because in the region, if you don't evolve, maybe you have to restart the process.
For sure. What's one of the biggest sort of misconceptions that global businesses have when they expand into Latam for the very first time?
Maybe in this case, the biggest misconception is assuming to all Latin American countries will be the same payroll logic. That is far from reality, because in many global companies come to the region and thinking, okay, Latin America is all the same countries, the same culture, all of them. In this moment is when I start the risks, because this is the exactly moment when you have really hard risks in our process, because it's not only regarding the names, because sometimes you say, okay, but all Latin American countries is the same, but the names of the elements is different. For example, in Peru, you're talking about the CTS. In Panama, you're talking about 2.14, but it's the same. Not the same, because it's, you have different interpretation, you have a different model, and maybe we can to assume that all of them is equal. Yeah, but locally, the logic, the calculation, the compliance implication are very different, And I think the most important thing is not only translate, because sometimes the global company limits his information to translate and not to interpret it, because in Latin America could be the same. Prima in Colombia look the same to Aguinaldo, Christmas bonus in Costa Rica, but not the same. It's a different expectation, it's a different calculation, and it's a different timing to pay. So that is the reason, because I try to, to try it in all is not a copy pasting model. We need to understand all process. We need to understand the local context, the every single detail. And in summarize, I think the biggest misconception in Latin America is they think that is one payroll reality. That's not one payroll reality. You need to understand that is a different alternative and a different framework. And, if you keeping in a only one payroll reality, in that moment, the mistake starts.
Yeah, for sure. Because it works similarly anywhere in the world, isn't it? You wouldn't just say, yeah, I do Europe payrolls. Like it's so different no matter where you are in the region, right? So from your experience, what is one of the things that leaders like really underestimate most about payroll in your region?
Right now here, well, I think the most important, sometimes forget for the leaders in Latin America or in they underestimate. Sometimes we happen, a mistake is only a mistake, just a mistake. And that's not real, Operational, maybe, yes, you have a small mistake. And so you say, that's okay. No bad situation. But what happened? The leader doesn't pay attention for that because, this month I pay, $10 US less. So it's okay. It's not important. But what happened there? When you don't put attention to the small mistake, that mistake escalates. It's bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you don't analyze it, and you don't do root cause analyze, you don't review what happened, because something minor, not actually, sometimes not a minor, it's a big important mistake. So I think the leader have to to evaluate maybe before correct and avoid that mistake could be a bigger fire, because in the future, that is the possibility. If you ignoring it, sooner or later, you will have a big problem, because that's happening in payroll. In payroll, I think it's a local situation, and I think right now, at the end of the day, the people are not expecting to perfection. Yes, of course, you could be having a mistake, but they want to feel safe. If you don't transmit that, if you don't offer trust to your employees or your client, maybe 1 star. So the mistake, analyze. Offer to the client that experience that you see the mistake and you want to correct for the future. Sometimes you forget that, and keeping is only a mistake. Now, I think that is the most important. Underestimate situation in the region.
For sure. And Ricardo, one of the things that I've heard you say a few times that has always stuck with me is that you say that payroll is navigated, not managed. So what are some of the key factors that make it so complex?
When you manage something, you try to control every small thing. That happens in the day by day. But doesn't work in payroll in Latin America. It's not about the control. It's about navigation. That is the reason, because I think we have to navigate through Latin American payroll. Because when you want to have to control for every single thing, very, very sooner will be lose the control. What the reason? Because in Latin America, constantly we have to move to different legal framework. Different culture and different people. Outside of Latin America, say Colombians and Peruvians and, Costa Ricans are the same. But no, we have done a different culture. We have a different things to work. That's the reason, because we have to move in to all of them. We have to move in to Colombia. We have to move into Dominican Republic. We have to move into Panama. And that movement is not management is about navigate to different culture, to different alternatives. It's in a constant balance. You need to have to understand when you have to accelerate, when you have to brake. You have to not only something to the system or the process. It's come to experience, instinct. You have the ability to read what happening really right now, and adjust the boat. Adjust if you are moving for this. If you have to move the one done. That is the most important thing that I have to say today about regarding this.
For sure, because I think to say that you manage something almost gives the impression that you know how it will go every single time, and you know everything about it, whereas navigation seems like such a nice way to put it, to show that you're continuously learning. Like, it's not the same every single time. There's different nuances that you have to accept that could happen. It's it's a journey.
It's a journey. Yeah, you say it's a journey. I think the most important, it's a journey. It's not only to management that. It's a journey that you have to adapt, to have to change, it's a lot of things you have today, day by day.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a couple of times already that organizations, when they're expanding into Latam, can often just think it's like one big place where all the rules are the same. I wondered if you have any examples of like where assuming equivalence between different countries has led to issues and what impact that may have had.
Yeah. When you work a lot of different Latin American period, you always have to take some. That happened. I remember maybe 10 years ago, or I don't know, more or less. We start working with Panama, and I say, we are in the implementation process, setup process. In Colombia, we have around to maybe 7 or 8 overtime element, usually to calculate, the extra payment for the employees, daytime, nighttime, holidays, maybe 7 or 8. It's okay. Doesn't matter. We move to Panama and we say, okay, the overtime in Colombia is here. Panama could be maybe the same, maybe a little different, the name, but in general idea could be the same. What was my surprise? When we arrived to Panama, we have more than 30 different combination to extra payment in Panama. It was amazing because we have to 7 jump into 30, more than 30. What happened in Panama, for example? In Panama, if you work more than 3 hours per day, extra time of course, you have to pay a different percentage. If you had to work more than 9 hours in the week, you have to pay a different work. And that's combination, 3, 4, 9, 11, work weekly, daily, all of them could be a total different situation. You have a lot of role, 30 different combination, and that multiple combination affect the process, delay the implementation process. That delayed of process, it was a really, really challenging for the team because we have to take more time, only 1 month to configure the overtime. And for me, that was a lesson. But the most important lesson in that moment is not only to, I assume the overtime in Colombia was the same to Panama and together, and not the same. It's different completely. And we have to understand the context before to start to implement the process. And that costs for us a lot of time, a lot of money for my client, and a lot of effort for the team. That's in the reason you have to not assume and understand, and before start build. That is the best way to have to work.
And I could kind of see in your face there as you was talking, like, I could almost see the shock that you felt in that moment.
Like, yeah, it was like, whoa, what happened here? This is was a little, me and my team was, what's happening here?
Yeah, I bet. So while we're kind of on those different kind of local nuances, how do differences in statutory benefits, so things like your 13th salary, CTS, bonuses, how do they create risk for employers?
When I talk about benefits, when I talk with people outside of Latin America or even to other countries, we want to work in the same way, to understand the same, standardize the language. That is the general idea. So I say, for example, 13 months to refer prima in Colombia, aguinaldo, Christmas bonus in Costa Rica, and gratification in Peru. I try to use the same name. What happened the same, for example, with the 14 month. I try to standardize cesantías in Colombia, bonus 14 in Guatemala, and all of them. I tried, but that's important, of course, but it's only for the standard language in order to other people understand easily from I say why refer. But when you go deeper, everything changes. The calculation rules, the payment timing, and the local context. That is so important because, one thing is say for the high level and other thing is the local compliance. It's so important to understand that, for example, the 13 month in Panama, we have to pay in 3 parts. Yes, in April, in August, and in December. It's okay, but when you talking with an USA company, they understand. You say 13 months, okay, it's payment in December. Yeah, it's the normal, assumption. You say it's paying in December. That makes sense. Or Christmas bonus, for example. But what happened in Colombia? That's split into payment in June and December. In Panama, 3 times. I say you. Yeah. In Costa Rica, it's common because it's only one payment in December, but only in Costa Rica, not other. In gratification in Peru is in July and December. So you have to understand that. And what are the risks? The risk is you assume that all legal benefits are the same in Latin America. And now we have different rules and very different rules. Very clear. Colombia and Peru is very clear, very close, but not the same. Almost alternative. And we have a different interpretation on the law. So that is the reason because I consider the equivalence is a very risky to take and assume the same. 14 months. For example, the 14 happened the same because the 14 in Colombia is payment to a specialized funds, a specialized entities in Colombia. In Guatemala, you pay directly to the employee. Yeah? And so that could be a little thing, but it's not the same. In the moment the payment is put in risk the local compliance. That is the reason because I consider we have to keep a simple language for standardized, for the high level, for the understanding the process in general. But you have to focus in execution and local compliance because at the end of the day, it's similar but not equal.
Yeah, because definitely things like, obviously you mentioned there the 13th month payment being split into 3 in certain regions, is it can be probably very easy for somebody to think, well, I've done a 13th month payment in this other country before, so it must just be the same, like we'll just pay it December, like you say. It's not just because it has the same name doesn't mean it's the same thing.
Yeah, that's the reason because not the same name or similar name means the same. That is the reason because we have to go deeper in that process. But yes, that happened. That happened. It's very, very common.
Yeah, I bet. So you've obviously been operating in this region for a long, long time. And what would you say are some of the most common payroll errors you see when people are managing across multiple different Latam countries?
Yeah, I have a top 3 for that because sometimes, we have for the 3. In the top 3, number 3. The number 3 is the over standardization. When I say over standardization, sometimes the companies try to implement the same payroll model for all countries. Yes, I think that is a mistake. Maybe Not the biggest, but it's the most important mistake. Because when you do on a same logic for all countries in Latin America, sometimes you forget the local context. You forget the, the local framework, the people requirement, the people expectation. And when you forget this, we will have some problem. That in that moment, some problems start. The second one is the false equivalence. We're talking regarding this 2 minutes ago. And now that when I say, the false equivalence, we try to say, okay, for example, in Guatemala and in Costa Rica, the name aguinaldo, Christmas bonus, is the same for both countries, but not the same basis calculation. Yes, because, for example, both payment in December, you say, okay, it's the same. It's exactly the same. No, the really is, you have to calculate, for example, the base of calculation in Guatemala is 1 year before to payment. You pay the 1st of December, you have to take December the last year until November 30. Yes. In case of Costa Rica, always is this year, January to December. Could be the same, but one little thing change everything because it's not the same calculation. That is the second problem. You say, okay, aguinaldo, Christmas bonus, both is the same number, but it's not the same. That is the most important thing. And the number one for me is ignoring the employee, the people expectation. Yes, because at the end of the day, the people is not only about being technically correct. You need to understand the employee. You need to understand the expectation to the employee and how communicate them. Because sometimes the companies, focus on the technical, the detail, the process, the software, the how they work, but forget completely the people, forget the teams, forget the employee, forget the local culture. At this moment, for me, that is the most important, because in summarize, the payroll is not about number, it's about people. I think so, that is all.
Sure. So here's a big one that I think we absolutely have to mention in this section where we're talking about what makes Latam different to other regions is tax. How do your tax systems across Latam differ in ways that global payroll leaders, people who are watching this, will need to understand early on?
We can talk in regard tax in Latin America for 1 hour if you want, but now I think so. The problem is, for example, the tax system in Latin America would be the same. They are very clear. Maybe half of the same name. Impuestos sobre la renta, income tax, employee income tax is the most common number in Latin America. But in Colombia, for example, and in Costa Rica even, we have a withholding taxes. It's not a specific calculation of the income tax. And that's the same because some the same, but not the same. That is a withholding in the future declaration to the employee. And you have to calculate monthly. Perfect. It's okay. If doesn't country, it's okay. Not a big challenge, but for example, in Peru, the 15 category discount, that's it. The fifth category is because the name of the employee income tax in Peru is the employee, is the direct tax. It's not withholding, it's a specific tax. As in Panama, as in Guatemala, it's a tax. It's not a withholding. So, for example, in Peru, we have to do an annual projection. You have to project the employee monthly income and project to yearly, and you have to do month by month. In January, in February, in March. So it's completely different to Colombia, because in Colombia you calculate the month and finish them. Saying in Costa Rica. In Peru, you have to calculate January, and when you calculate February, you have to review January and back and go to the future. Calculate the possible payments in March, April, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that's completely different. But it's not only that you say, okay, some countries is monthly basis, other countries a yearly basis. Sound complicated, but it's possible. But that doesn't finish then. Yeah, you have to check. For example, in some countries you have tax relief. Tax relief in countries like Colombia, for example, if you have a kid, a baby, you have a discount to the taxes. That does happen in other countries. It only happen in Colombia. So in other countries, as an Peru, you have a certificate for payment to the tax authority, and you receive a discount. So only happen in Peru. That does not happen in other country. That is the reason, because I think that is a complex. You have to check a lot of things. Monthly basis, yearly basis, tax relief. And that is the way you have to pay attention, especially the tax system in Latin America, because, you have almost five, if you have 5 countries, you have 5 different tax system. That is the reason, because the tax is not only one thing. You have, maybe have some things in common, but you have to review all of them. However, I have good news. In Latin America, one thing works in all countries. The taxes are progressive. If you receive more money, you have to pay more taxes. It's only that repeat in all countries. I think that happened in all world, in fact.
So at least, if people are expanding into a Latin American country for the first time, there's one thing that they can start off with. So speaking of those people who are expanding into Latin America for the first time, and there will be people watching this today who are looking to expand in the future. They are considering Latin America as a target for them. They would like to expand. What would you recommend are 3 things that they should prioritize when making that consideration, making that move?
Let me think in order to give you the best advice for this. I think, yeah. I catch it. We have 3 things. The first one, obviously, you have to understand the legal framework. This is important. This is the starting to the process, because you have to understand very clear how work the local labor laws, the statutory benefits, the compliance, the requirements. I think that is the first one. The second one, I was just talking regarding this. Understand the tax system, because sometimes say, okay, the tax system is our thing, doesn't have anything with the payroll. But no, in Colombia, for example, in Costa Rica, that is a very sensitive situation for the employee, because if you discount more taxes, the employee don't be happy. No, I think nobody loves to pay taxes. That is the reason. That is the reason, because I think we have to do very, very, confident with this thing. And the final one, the tier, I think that here some companies underestimating here. When the client or the employee doesn't, understand the employee expectation, and maybe they forget, because usually you say, I understand the legal framework, I understand the tax system, so for me, all is okay. Not all is okay. The people expectation is so important, because, the people is, in the end of the day, he received the payment, and they understand, no more or less, they live the reality of the country. For example, they understand perfectly. So that's the reason, because I think the payroll is not only about the legal, it's also cultural. You have to understand the local culture and the local people.
Yeah, I think, payrolls are really personal thing, isn't it? You are the function in the business that touches the lives of every single person that works for you, and their families as well. So I think it's really, really important that that's a big consideration, and that all of the differences within Latin American countries are considered, because, like you said, what works in one doesn't work in another. And what you don't want to do is make that mistake when you're paying somebody, and then they end up upset and you ruin the the experience. And
yeah.
I think
Of course.
it's really, really key.
Of course.
Okay, so something I'd like to ask you is about that interpretation over translation piece. So how can organizations build that kind of capability internally?
That's a little hard. For me, the interpretation start, you move to, to sometimes you have to, the interpretation start when you move to the front, understanding how something works, to understand why it is working that way. Yeah. Because sometimes we limit it to that's core, that just means that, and this is the way. But if you understand why that is the way, for example, in Colombia, when you go to vacation, the Social Security will be paid for the previous month base. Why? Why? You say, okay, but you say, okay, I understand how it works, but why it works that way? In Colombia, our government some years ago started to work in that way, and finally understand the people. For example, the employees that receive extra payment, if you receive best payment to Social Security before, if they are on vacation, they don't receive extra payment, so his Social Security payment will be go down. That is the reason, because in that moment, the government or the I don't know who take the decision, but at that moment, that is the reason, and you understand. Okay, maybe for administrative person, that's unchanging. It's exactly the one, because the salary will be the same in both months. But when you have an manufacturing company, and you have a construction company, you have to pay an extra, other overtime and all of them, that changes completely. Really? And that is the reason, because I say, why that it works that way. And that is hard. I understand that is hard, but I think that especially. For example, I love in Solutions Payroll regarding this, because usually we start to work in a new country, and you adapt all of the country and the process and understand the legal framework. But that is not only that. You have to, understand the client, understand the organization. If you don't understand the organization, maybe you do the middle of the work, only the half of the work, not all of them per se. So, in this case, I recommend, for example, to do a document for a design, a solution design, say, so in Solutions Payroll regarding this. A solution design, because that solution design adapt not only to the local legal framework, adapt to the client though, because at the end of the day, we have to keep happy to the client or to the employees, and that is the way you try to understand the legal framework, and other side to try the internal policies of the client, the local culture, all of them, and put in a documentation and a solution in order to offer the best solution to the client. And that is the way, don't I think, you start to create trust with the client, with the employee, and with all of the stakeholder in these cases.
Absolutely. So I think for people expanding into Latam, whether it's for the first time or whether they're already operating in a Latam country and are maybe expanding into another, second or third, whatever, I think that kind of like local expertise is really, really important. From your perspective and, your experience at Solutions and Payroll, what kind of role does that local expertise play, and how should a business structure that support?
I one of the biggest mistakes I see, I try to solve everything from the central perspective, because some companies, when we have a lot of countries, we has a headquarters in USA and try to get solution for all things with the USA. But in USA, you don't understand better the Latin American way to think. So I think you need to understand and listen to local teams. Yeah, because sometimes what happen, try to resolve all process, all project, all every single thing from outside the country could be a big mistake, a big mistake. Yeah, actually, I understand that the local team live the reality, not only yes, not only the knowledge, not only have the knowledge or understanding the law. No, they live the reality. They understand how work the system, how why the system work that way. So that most important for me is to, in order to create a strong payroll model in Latin America, you need to create a space from to learn to the local things. Sometimes happen, but sometimes doesn't happen, and you need to listen there, validate to adapt with him. Then, because the local expertise, they offer you the local context. You can do the from USA or from Europe. No, you only reach the local context with the local things. In the end of the day, you have to do a mix between, a strong central governance, of course, we allow from empowered local expertise. Because if you don't empower the local expertise, you forget the half of the thing. You forget the most important thing. Because, the model payroll is important for the keeping a general frame to work. And the local expertise is for an avoid mistake, because the local expertise is to get you the perfection in that thing, because they understand all of them, the details. They go to the detail, the small thing, the pair, and the small thing could be is not only support. I think it's very important and is a foundation for the current way to work in Latin America.
Yeah, and like you said, those local experts, they're the people that have lived and breathed those payrolls their whole working life. And even if they didn't work in payroll forever, they've been paid in those countries for their whole lives. So they know the impact of something going wrong. They know what their taxes mean. They know what their pay slips mean. So yeah, I agree. I think it's really, really important to have someone with that local knowledge, that local understanding, and also that kind of understanding of what can go wrong. Because unless you've lived it and breathed it, it's not always as easy to know what could just go wrong. So when you've got a multi-country payroll, whether that's a global payroll or just multi-country within the Latam region, how do you balance things like, or how do you balance those regional standardization with the need for local flexibility?
That's a great question for me. I work in a lot of years under the ISO quality standard. And actually, part of the process of when Solutions and Payroll obtain the certification, so you might think, what does have to go to do with payroll? Yes, you say me, okay, but we're talking regarding to payroll. Why you're talking regarding to quality standard? Because ISO teach me what you need to do: a strong framework, clear procedure, clear policies and control in a regional model payroll. Yeah. And that framework should be defined centrally to set direction. For example, we start business in Colombia, so we define the governance structure for payroll model in Latin America. Yes, and we move into other countries, we keep that standard, but when you move into other, the local teams go to bring agility, to understand they really work in the country, to adapt the execution to the reality. Because, you offer the standard possibility, but the standardization is okay, will be great. All of them see you, it's an amazing, but when you go to the local thing, you go then for agility because the local things are very quick understand, quick take decision, and this is the moment you have to go to flexibility, you know, and the most important is connect both, you know, connect standardization with flexibility. If you only go to standardization, usually the process goes slow, too slow. If you go to the, only for the local team, the process will be very quick. But when the process is quick, very fast, too fast, that, brings some mistake. Then you have to move in a balance. You have to keep a strong regional payroll model and a local expertise, and it's a mechanism in order to work because both offer you standardization plus flexibility, not only one or only there. That is the reason because I think the most important is that, adaptation to both model. That's the most important.
For sure. And like I've a few friends that operate in Latam payrolls, and like throughout the time I've asked them a lot of questions about how similar, like how do you standardize processes and manage that kind of like local flexibility piece. And one person said something that I thought was a really, really nice way of describing it is those kind of frameworks and those standardized processes are almost like the tree trunk. And then there's like little branches coming off where that local flexibility is needed. And it's all tied to that one big tree trunk. But there are things that need to grow and change to kind of adapt to where that's going to be. So kind of on that subject of how to navigate, like you said, not manage, how to navigate LATAM payrolls, what would a well-structured multi-country payroll model look like in LATAM?
For me, a well-structured multi-country payroll model in LATAM is not about having one single process. It's about having a strong framework and to adapt to different realities. I say you, every country have a different reality. So we have to have, repeat the previous one. You have to have a very central governance, a very strong, because you have to need clear all of the framework. But the second one is the local expertise, of course. It's so important because the central governance is very important. The local expertise is the second element, so important in Latin in order to execute a good process in payroll. You can reach a big result if you don't join that point. Yes, but it's not only that. You have to integrate this with an element for me very important is a solution design. I told you before there, and the idea is you can go to the solution design to understand the local framework, they understand the client expectation, and offer a best mix in all of them. You have. And finally, the technology, of course, because if the technology right now is the most important thing in all topics in the work. Yeah. Obviously, for payroll, it's not different. We have the same way important thing or model software than EA operation and all of them, ANA and all of them. But in this case, you have to have four things very important. In summarize, a strong multi-country payroll model in Latin America connects all of them. Central governance, local expertise, solution design, and technology as an enabler. Yes, because the successful you have to reach only to do a perfect union in all of them in order to offer the processing payroll and management and really confidence and obtain a big result is the only way. I think so. It's my
I would agree. I think it's a bit like almost like a recipe. Like you need to have all of those little elements to make it run smoothly. So I'm really, really glad you touched on technology there. It's obviously a massive topic that everybody's discussing. Like you said, it doesn't matter whether you're in payroll or retail or whatever you're doing. It's things are moving. Like every organization is adapting and bringing in new technology to change the way that you're doing things. So in global payroll platforms, where do things typically kind of fall short when it comes to Latin America?
I agree. I consider the global payroll platform a very powerful tools for working in Latin American model. But what happens sometimes, they don't fully adapt to the payroll to the local reality. They have a big tool, but on a high level tool, world level tool. And what is the, if you have to understand, many organizations that assume only to pay for a global payroll platform is enough. That's, I think, some mistake, because usually the almost all global payroll platform starting in Europe and USA. So very, very functional there. But here we have to accept Latin America is a new market for this process. So we are, in a development process. Maybe USA and Europe have more time, more complexity and reach better result with the pass of time. But Latin America, for example, is new for that. So that is the way. That is perfect. It's okay. That's work. You can offer a global payroll, but according to my experience, you need to to do little adjustment, not too much, a little adjustment in order to put inside to local reality in the global platform. For example, you have to understand the names or elements in order to connect better with the people in the country. Yes, because say me 13 months, maybe not connect to Colombians, maybe not connect to Colombian 13 months better, because the people understand in that way. But in general, I think if you implement the global platform and you taking into account the local culture, the local context, even that details, you will have a powerful tools, because that is the way to development, the best way to work in the future, and is the best way to the people understand and the people connect with the company. You have to remember this is not only the global payroll, in fact, only then save you to the mistake. Not the global payroll is a big mistake. It's a big tool to strong. But if you forget the local realities, you could be have the global payroll only that save you. You could be continue with the mistake if you don't understand that you have to assemble both. Because the most important is for me is to understand the global payroll is a powerful powerful tool in order to reach the best result, but it's not avoid the local realities. You have to understand both. But I think them is the most important. The system, I think the technology itself don't save you. The technology is for increase your capabilities. It's not for save you. You need to understand, to create, to build, and later to move best tools in order to increase your capabilities.
Of course. The system is only ever going to be as good as the people behind it, right? The people that are actually putting in that data and making sure that it all works. So is there any questions that you would encourage payroll leaders to ask before they implement payroll technology in the region?
Okay, perfect. The company is taking decision, starting, what the key question to the leader have to do when they, before to explain implementation payroll technology in Latin America, in the region. I think we have to work with how does the legal and tax framework actually works in the country. That's for me the question that all leaders that want to implement new technology here have to understand. Why? Because that is not only high level practice. You need to go to the practice, go to the calculation, go to the how I apply the tele and the compliant requirement, of course. So if you don't have very clear this information, you can advance to the second one. And what other question? What the concept really means? What is the concept really means? Why? Because, talking regarding this through the all interview, sometimes the same meaning is not the same application. That is important to understand, what exactly means 13 months here, how is calculating, how is work, because the most important thing and the order and the date and the up, in order to you take advantage of the technology is only to understand that thing. The third one, how the people experience the payroll in that country, because not only Latin Americans have the same perception of the payroll of the payment. Maybe and it's not the same perception in the date of payment, for example. It's not the same perception for the payment in the 13-month payment in Colombia in June that in December. In December is most important because it's December now. In June, it's okay. You have a little delay one day. I accept it. Doesn't matter. But maybe in December, I need to use the payment punctual because now December have another lot of family thing, and you need to understand that context for all process. Because, at the level, it's not only about compliance. It's about the people, expectation, about perception, the people. And that is the reason because I think if you asking this before to start into technology implementation process in Latin America, if you do that, if you do step by step, you have a big tool for the payroll process because you will be understand all details. And even that will be a multiplier for the process, a multiplier for the right thing. But if you don't do that, what happened? The mistake is escalate because the people usually will be in the same. So my simple advice in this case is understand deeply the payroll process in each country and later build a technology, build a process in order to go better. I think this is the best.
Yeah, I think so. So I think we only have a couple of minutes left, but I think something really important that I'd like to cover before we finish today is that kind of like culture and communication piece. And it's almost like a hidden layer. How should payroll teams adapt their communication styles across different LATAM countries to make sure that, they're operating smoothly across them all? Because you've said so many times, it's not just one big country, it's so different, and those cultures are different too. So yeah, how would you say they should kind of adapt?
I think I think the most important thing here in this question is a very hard question. I have to say, but you need to understand your local team first. I think so the most important because what's happening here that usually people think one size fits all, and that's not right. Because, for example, in Colombia, even depending on the city, but in general in Colombia we have the same culture, the same usually, and that is great. That is okay. I think Colombia have a mixed cultural details, and it's possible to communicate really easy. Yes. However, for example, in Panama, it's really different because Panama is a city, the to side to the ocean. I have a different way to think in this thing. And that is the way I prefer that you need to talking with the people, adjustment, and review the expectation of the people. Because if you don't understand this, it's very, very hard to understand the general situation. For example, some cultures are very formal. It's like Colombia, maybe, like Mexico. But other culture is a little, really, really informal. Like Dominican Republic, for example, they live in an island. That is amazing. So that is a different culture in order to connect them. Yes. So for example, I remember I happened a big problem with an employee from Dominican Republic for that because they have a question, a simple question. I don't remember exactly the simple question, but they are a really, really simple question. We taking into Colombia, review all details, checking a pressure, analyze a root cause, analyze for the process, and maybe taking 3 or 4 days and answer to the employee. What happened? The employee escalated the situation because he only needs one thing. He wants a direct connection and a direct, maybe he wants a message to explain here. Very short thing. That's the reason because you have to adapt to the style, to need to navigate through the culture because it's not the same to talking with an Dominican Republic guy and talking with a Peruvian or talking with a Colombian or talking with a Guatemalan. So my recommendation here is you have to think different and, for example, use a different word because in Spanish, not the same word means the same in all countries. So
yeah,
I think that's happening in some region in and it's different to talking with Australian, with Americans and British people, but the same. But here taking into account, we have 20 different countries. So you have to could be, for me, keep on a standardized Spanish language. You say standardized? Yes, try to use a standard because usually, for example, you use a very local word in Colombia. Doesn't mean the same in Mexico, for example.
yeah, like you use the slang and then
Yeah,
it's just not the same.
I think the first one is avoid to slang. Usually, I know. For me, I like it, the slang. I like it. To say around the world. For example, in Colombia, we use a lot the word parce. Parce means friend in Colombia, and really, really common. You're using an artist and all that thing. But if you say parce or other kind of word in Dominican Republic or in Mexico or in Costa Rica, that makes sense there. And that makes sense.
Yeah, they'll just look at you like,
It's the most important thing I hear when you try to talking with all, your teams across Latin America, with employees across Latin America, you keep a standard Spanish, obviously, closely, not, but you have to be closely, but avoid the slang because the slang is not the same in our country. Even, for example, in Latin America, some words that could be a good thing in our country could be a bad thing in other country, and it could be very great. Even, not is a bad word there, so you have to avoid it. And the second one,
yeah,
to understand that some people live, close to the sea. For example, we live in a big city. We're thinking more. We're running because some people are running too fast. Other people go slow because it's like in Jamaica. It's more slow to island.
yeah.
That's mean, I think, is the best way you have to integrate all of them, to understand in what moment you have to go closely, in what moment you have to go slow, you have to go. For me, avoid slang always in our process in Latin America because the slang in Latin America is very common, very, very common. And some people, unfortunately, only talking with the slang all time. It's very common. I say you in Colombia. In Colombia, we use a lot of the words as an aparte, as an other kind of word that doesn't mean anything outside Colombia. Doesn't have any sense outside Colombia. So that's the reason, because I try to give to the people of my team. For example, I say try to talk in order to all people understand you. That I think the third one. The second one, keep it close, understand the people, and finally, learn from the people. And sometimes, usually, I say, okay, I work in global payroll. I know every single thing, but not. You have to work with the people, and maybe you have to learn from them, because they are very, very important. And I say all interview, I think the payroll is not about number, it's about people, it's about the employee. If you understand that, I think you understand all my interview.
I think so. And I think that's such a nice message to end the session on. I think like payroll isn't just about numbers, it's about people, is just summing up not only Latin American payroll, but payroll around the world. So yeah, look, I think we have run out of time. Ricardo, you're someone that I could speak to for hours and hours and hours and hours. Maybe next year we can do 24 hours. But look, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today, and sharing your expertise with the audience. There's going to be people watching that are expanding into Latam for the first time, or are managing payrolls in Latin America, and potentially they're new to the region, or they're not specifically experts in that region, who will have learned a lot from this session. And I know that, you're somebody that people can reach out to like understand things a little bit further, and potentially get some of that local expertise from you. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. And also thank you to everyone watching today. Please do stay tuned for the rest of the sessions. It's been fantastic talking to you, Ricardo. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Natalie. I'm very, very happy to be with you in this interview. I'm very, very happy to talk with you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye to you. Hello.
Bye. Thank you so much.